Alright, what's going on everyone? I'm Zero and welcome back to Zero 2, where today we're doing a ban list prediction. It's about that time of year where we expect the ban list to come out pretty soon, and so I wanted to take this time to sort of talk over the format as a whole, give my thoughts, alongside what needs to get hit and where it should be on the ban list. So we'll go through the meta decks one by one that I think that really need to get touched. And then we'll go ahead and transition into like hand traps and other like more generic stuff. And then finally, we'll move into talking about some fun cards I think could come back off of the ban list. But starting off with the king of the meta, the cream of the crop, Ryziel. I think no one can disagree that Ryziel is the best deck in terms of performance. Malice, of course, a very strong deck, don't get me wrong, but Ryziel is clearly far and away set itself up as the best deck, and so I put a number of cards on here from Ryziel that I'd like to discuss, so that way we can holistically take a look at all of their problematic stuff and see where it needs to go. Starting out with Ice. While Ice is very strong, it's one of the best starters for the deck. It can be an extender for the deck, just an all-in-all really powerful card. I don't think Ice necessarily needs to get hit for Ryziel. But what I do think needs to get a hit is Ext. Ext is arguably their most powerful tool, both going first and second. Getting to set up extra deck pieces in the graveyard to put under Detonator, like a Meteorologic Aggregator, is really strong. Getting the opportunity to going second, also just directly send the Meteorologic Aggregator to do a negate on an opponent's board while you're starting to set up your own is insanely powerful. And so limiting the opportunity for your opponent to directly see X'd, I think, is something that's going to be important moving forward to keep the deck in a slight amount of check. I don't think that they need to completely outright ban it. I think it's an important part of the combo, and it's still very easy to get to via a number of different sources, but it does now make a lot of their opening lines a bit more vulnerable or fragile or less consistent. In that vein, I'd also like to limit Bonfire. I think that with the release of the new Tachyon stuff coming out, there is a lot of consistency that Ryziel is going to be able to get by playing the Tachyon cards. And I think that right now that Bonfire is their better option. I think it's what they'll continue to play if it doesn't get hit. But I think that Konami's probably going to hit this to push product reasons. I think that hitting this will push the Tachyon cards to be purchased and played and used, so people will buy Maze of the Master. But beyond that, I mean, Bonfire is just an insanely good generic searcher. I mean, searching for any level 4 or lower Pyro has been strong since its release, whether it was searching Snake Eye stuff, whether it was searching Centaurion stuff, now it's searching Ryziel stuff. This is just too strong of a generic searcher that's been around for well past its prime, or well past its due. It's stayed around for a bit too long now. So I think that limiting Bonfire makes the most sense to me as another consistency hit. What you don't need to hit is Detonator. Detonator's not the... It is the best card in the deck. It's the like end board piece. It's the strongest heart and soul of the deck. And maybe it does need to go eventually, but I don't think hitting it in any sort of way right now makes any sort of sense. Limiting it doesn't really do too much, although you do typically run 2 copies of it. But I think that for now, leaving that at 3 is fine, especially with these 2 limits. And this ban, I think that if Xyz needs to go from the Ryziel extra deck, it needs to be Abyss Dweller. Abyss Dweller is an insanely strong rank 4 that completely invalidates graveyard strategies, completely destroys rogue decks, and is something that they can recycle consistently with something like an Eclipse Twins. So I think that Abyss Dweller needs to go. What I think the actual problem card in Ryziel is Eclipse Twins. I think eventually this card is just too strong to stay around. It will have to go. But for the moment, I don't see Konami touching it just due to the fact that it's so new. It's something that has just been released to bolster the Ryziel strategy and stuff like that. So I don't see Eclipse Twins going anywhere. But certainly I think Abyss Dweller has had its time. This also does slightly hit rogue options like Mermail Lantheon, and then the other strategy that's putting out rank 4s has been consistently trying to find a way to slot Abyss Dweller in the extra deck for as long as I can remember now. So giving graveyard decks some breathing space, I think, is important in the current format. Moving on to Malice. Malice has a number of different options we can look at hitting, all of which kind of feel a bit awkward and insufficient. For example, Whitebinder, I don't think is the problematic of even the three main deck monsters. I think it can stay at three with minimal problems. Dormouse is the only main deck piece I could see them hitting. Really, only piece of the Malice engine I could see them hitting because I guess we can skip. I don't think Whitebinder needs to be hit. People only play it at one anyways. It's very strong. Obviously, it's a great extra deck tool that they have access to. But I don't think it's time for Whitebinder to get banned. I feel like that's a bit preemptive. I think you could see like a semi-limit of Dormouse. Again, I don't know if that does much. I mean, it certainly hurts their consistency slightly. They already have struggles with consistency issues just due to the sheer lack of like Malice monsters you have in rotation. They're getting new support though in the upcoming sets, so it'll be interesting to see how this deck evolves. But I do think that if any of the Malice pieces themselves need to get hit, it would be Dormouse, probably Dormouse to 2. Moving on to stuff that is honorary Malice, and we can move Shifter up here too. I'm realizing is also an honorary Malice card to talk about. Let's start with the Allure of Darkness. Initially, when people were trying to come up with bans or hits or limits to affect this deck, they were talking about Allure of Darkness, but actually, if you look at usage statistics in deck lists that are topping events, they don't even really play Allure of Darkness at any number of copies, much less 3. So I don't think Allure getting hit actually does anything. I do think they probably will hit it, which is the sad part. I think they probably will limit Allure to 1, just because I think Konami sees that as, oh, it's the older generic draw spell that Malice is taking advantage of. Let's hit that and circumvent the problem, rather than actually addressing any of the other issues with Malice. But I do think that this is what they will likely do. I personally think it could go to unlimited. I don't see why we would hit this. There's other cards we want to hit, and we'll talk about those in a second. But this is where I think Konami is going to put it. So this is kind of my prediction on what they're doing, not necessarily my own wants and desires. Link Decoder, a card that I hear almost no one talking about when trying to hit Malice. This, to me, is one of the most obvious bans in order to check the deck that I can think of. Them having access to a generic Link 1 that also brings itself back as a body when they make a Link 2, just to make it insanely easy to get back up into their Whitebinder or their Malice QR Scripter or Red Ransom. This card just does so much. It chain blocks. It provides them plays through Nibiru. It provides them so many plays through different interruptions. It's just an absolutely cracked, crazy card. I don't think Konami ever intended it for it to be used in the way it's being used right now, as in the Malice strategy, and so I think it is Link Decoder's time to hit the ban list. But I don't even think that would be enough. I think Malice is still an extremely competent strategy, and you can see right now the only hits we have for them are the Dormouse to 2, which realistically I don't even see Konami doing, but maybe they will. I think they might actually, but Link Decoder to 0 would be a very nice hit, but the deck would still be very, very strong. Too strong even, I think, given all the hits I made to Ryziel. So I think that we're going to have to also limit all of the Bystials. The Bystials are something that the Malice deck plays in spades. They typically play like 3 Druisworm, 3 Baldrake. They're playing the Magnamut. Some are even dipping into Saronir. And if you only hit Druisworm or Baldrake, they just start playing more Saronir. I think that the only option is to limit all of them. They're just simply too strong in that many copies. They provide Malice with so many different ways to extend, play through hand traps, play through interruption. It just gets really frustrating when they have a critical mass of them combined with at least like 1 or 2 Malice monsters. So I think that this would be a nice check to the deck without completely crippling it. It obviously still has plenty of plays without all the Bystials. These were just like nice synergies that they've worked out and found. I think Malice is still highly playable, even if you limit all the Bystials. But I do think it is time for them to go. But the one Bystial that I think cannot go to limited and must go to banned is Bystial Magnamut. Magnamut is insanely strong hand trap that has been the best Bystial since its release. Being able to search another Bystial or any dragon in the end phase is really, really strong. And this to me acts as both a hit to Malice, because obviously Malice plays the Magnamut, but just any deck that was taking in the Bystials, especially something like Blue Eyes, because Blue Eyes is a deck you'll notice I don't have any cards on here for. And that's because I'm convinced that it's probably not going to be touched for the next couple lists at the very least, if at all. I think Konami loves the idea of having Blue Eyes be one of their better decks. I personally do. I think Blue Eyes being a good deck is really cool. So, getting to have this card be hit would be a very minor slap on the wrist to Blue Eyes as well, who does play this card, while also just putting something that has been longstanding, a staple in the bestial little package of hand traps for forever, finally behind bars where it belongs, in my opinion. But that's where I think it needs to go. And then last but certainly not least is Dimension Shifter. Again, this is technically a Malice hit, although this card has been seeing play for years both before and after Malice. I do think that Dimensional Shifter has seen its time in the sun and has been here for far too long. It's time for it to go. I think this is the format where we can finally say goodbye to it. It's just so oppressive when it resolves. It being able to completely stomp out rogue decks and strategies, it being able to invalidate even a lot of the meta graveyard related strategies as a lingering floodgate that's really hard to interact with. It just feels completely unfair. It's not like Malice relies around Dimension Shifter. Malice can still put up insanely strong end boards and combos and setups without Dimension Shifter. This is typically like the icing on the cake that just is an auto win button for them if they draw it. So I don't like that. It's been in the format for far too long. I think finally Malice might be the camel that broke, or the straw on the camel that broke the camel's back. But it'll remain to be seen. I could just as easily see Konami ignoring this for another ban list, but I think that'd be really disappointing because of how unfun, in my opinion, this card is to play against. Moving onwards, we've got the Fiendsmith cards to talk about here. The Fiendsmith cards are very strong, as I'm sure everyone is aware. They've been seeing a ton of play since their release, and have been splashed in pretty much every single deck possible. I mean, there's Fiendsmith Malice, there's Fiendsmith Ryziel, there's some people even playing like Fiendsmith Blue Eyes. Fiendsmith can be thrown in pretty much anything because any two monsters makes full Fiendsmith combo, essentially. And you play a relatively small main deck package for a relatively high payoff in terms of end board pieces and whatnot. So with that in mind, I think it is about high time that Fiendsmith gets checked, especially if we're limiting all the Bystials and getting rid of Shifter. Graveyard stuff like the Fiendsmith stuff would get even better. So I think, without a doubt, Fiendsmith Engraver needs to be limited. I think that Fiendsmith Engraver at 1 checks a lot of the main combos that the full Fiendsmith package is able to do. A lot of them involve 2 Engraver in niche or interesting scenarios. Whereas putting it to 1 still allows you to do a lot of the Fiendsmith stuff you're doing if you're playing the Lacrima and the Engraver package. It just prevents it as being like a starter. It's kind of like a mid-combo extender or part of the combo you pivot into, and less so like a combo starter or hand trap insulator, because you can't make the Caesar consistently if you don't draw into this guy, and especially with there's only one of him. So I think that this will be a nice check to the deck. I could see them also semi-limiting something like Fiendsmith Tract as well, because if you limit Engraver, you could just buff the number of copies of Tract you play. It doesn't fully recover for the fact that you only have 1 Engraver. Again, a lot of combos that Fiendsmith goes through do require the second Engraver to be both in rotation and like 1 on board, 1 engrave, so you can cycle back and get the 2 6s. But I'll semi-limit on Track, I think, can also make a lot of sense. They might just leave it at 3, especially if they do limit the Engraver, but I do think it remains to be seen. What I don't think they're going to do is hit the Requiem. I do think that this is one of the core problems with the deck, having a Link 1 in the extra deck that gets you access to the full combo line. I think its materials to make it are just a bit too generic, and it's probably going to have to go eventually. I just don't think that time is now. I think they're likely aiming to reprint a lot of the Fiendsmith cards soon, and I don't see them banning the core combo piece of them to push product. That doesn't make sense to me. So I think instead what they're going to do is keep this around for at least 1 more format, maybe 2. And then I do eventually think this will find its way onto the chopping block. But for now, I think it stays at 3. In that same vein, I think that Closed Goddess also stays at 3. This is another card they could consider banning if they want to put some limits on the power of the Fiendsmith engine, because this is the generic extra deck tool that turns any 2 monsters into Fiendsmith combo. It doesn't fully solve the problem because there are rank 4s like Exciton Knight, that can kind of do the same thing that the closed heaven already does, but it would make it a bit more restricted or significantly more restricted, which would be a nice thing. But again, I don't think I see this going in the near future. This part of the engine to me stays intact, whereas the engraver and maybe the sort of the consistency of the larger main deck package needs to get reduced. But those are all the hits that I have for the like decks and archetypes that are dominating the meta right now. Outside of these top three, like quote unquote decks or engines, these roughly account for like I think it's something close to like 80% of the format, with the rest of the decks being at least one rung down. So I'm hoping that what Konami does is take the Ryziel deck, take the Malice deck, knock them down a peg or two down to where the other decks currently are, and then I think we'll see ourselves in a relatively diverse and interesting format with a lot of different powerful options available to us. But it remains to be seen. And we will now be moving on to the hand traps or meta relevant one ofs that we kind of want to talk about as potentially also getting hit. So the first one on the list is a card that I actually don't expect to get hit. I put it on here just for sake of discussion because Artifact Lancia is in one of the most interesting spots I think a Yu-Gi-Oh card can be in at this given time. By current usage statistics, Artifact Lancia is currently sitting at a 96% side deck rate at 3 copies in every player, so essentially in every player's side deck at top events. This is obviously to check Malice, and I think it does a really great job of checking Malice, and specifically Malice doesn't really bleed too much into the other top decks, which is why I think it's a healthy card that can stay around. But this card is having an absurd usage rate. Like, I don't think we've seen a card have this high of a usage rate in God knows how long. So I think that it's at least worth talking about. Is it healthy for a card that is this consistent of a usage rate to be sticking around in the format? I think because of what this card does, the answer is yes, but there is some discussion to be had of like if a card is completely ubiquitous, everyone is playing it, is it healthy to stick around in Yu-Gi-Oh? Just some food for thought. And in kind of that similar vein, and a card that I know is what a lot of players dislike about the current format, and that is the Mulcharmies. But I think the peak offender, the one that people have the most problems with, is Mulcharmy Fuelos. Unfortunately for y'all, I don't think it's going anywhere. I think that Mulcharmy Fuelos is a very strong card. I think it is it's a much more well balanced version of Maxi, and I think that this is Konami's solution for the Maxi problem that has divided the OCG and the TCG for so long. I'm of the opinion that Konami currently wants to unite the regions, especially through Master Duel, but I think their vision is for like one eventually unified format. And currently, Maxi is the big divide between the regions. It's the card that's been so divisive. And so I think by printing the new Mulcharmies as like a, hey, here's a nice middle ground that maybe both regions can agree on as an acceptable like medium or happy state in between Maxi, and then slowly phasing Maxi out of the game in the OCG and in Master Duel, we'll get to see a more unified format, something that feels familiar for all the different players. Because I think Konami's starting to realize as we're moving into a more modern age of Yu-Gi-Oh, it's a lot easier to handle global distribution at a more synchronized rate than it was back in the early 2000s. And so you can release product in synchronicity. You can have a shared unified format, but working towards that is going to take some time. And I think that this is kind of their first step on that journey. So yeah, these are probably stuck around to stay. Fortunately for those who feel priced out of it, it's going to get reprinted soon, but it's certainly not going to get banned, I don't think. Another card to discuss is Dimensional Barrier. This is a card that people have been clamoring for a ban on and off for quite some formats. I think we're currently in a format where not a lot of people think it should be banned, even though it does see a decent amount of play. Obviously, a really strong win button against Ryziel going first. Has a lot of impact against the Blue Eyes deck if you flip it against them, calling like Synchro. And so I think that it is in a relatively strong like point, but it also doesn't feel particularly oppressive. If the Ryziel opponent is playing Fiendsmith, then they can just combo around it. Similarly, Blue Eyes players can still set up a pretty imposing link board with just the Heretic Seal backed up with like a Drill Beam and stuff like that. So it's not entirely like broken, Um, and with that in mind, I think it stays at 3 this format. I think it survives. Is it a card that I think will eventually have to go? Yep, I do, because it is a lingering floodgate that like essentially invalidates strategies that are focused on one summoning mechanic. It's something that I think maybe even should have gone a format or two ago, but just kind of barely evaded the ban list. And because of the state that Yu-Gi-Oh's in at the moment, I think it gets to stick around for a bit longer. Now, this one's going to be controversial because Mermail and other water decks that use the Barrier Statue of the Torrents aren't seeing a significant amount of success at the moment. So why is this on here? Well, I wanted to put it on here because I do think that while they aren't like completely destroying the top decks, this is probably the most unfair thing that they're doing among any of the rogue decks is setting up a barrier statue. I don't think any sort of lingering like floodgates like this, like Fossil Dyna, like um, Benny's Emptiness, are healthy for the game in any sense of the word. And so, while this would be like a dream ban for me, I think that they should ban it to like really get the game into the best possible state. I do think it probably stays at 3. I really want it to be banned. I want to reiterate, I really want it to be banned. And if I had my way, I would ban this to make the perfect format. But I do think it's going to stay at 3. But just keep this on your radar and don't be surprised if this gets banned. I do think this is something that's on Konami's radar, especially after YCS Birmingham, and we'll have to see how YCS Vegas turns out. But I do expect that Torrents has a limited shelf life. I don't think it's going to be this fan list, but I do think it has to go eventually. Honestly, all the barrier statues are probably going to need to go on the list eventually, but this is the next one on the chopping block. Moving on, we've got some unlits, some cards that are some changes and limitations. Some of these cards I put on here, some of these cards I didn't. So we'll talk about them in their varying different degrees here. Branded Fusion's on here. This was not one I wanted to necessarily discuss, but we can talk about it. It was put to 1 for what feels like a very strange reason. Like Branded was like the 6th best deck at the time when they limited it. And since then, they've gotten rid of the gimmick puppet, but that didn't even fix the problem because you can still do the Albion locks with something like an Ito. So I think I would love to see this back at 3. I could see Konami bringing it back to kind of push Branded. I know that they've kind of had Branded on their mind on recent Master Duel ban lists. So bringing back Branded Fusion would be a step in the right direction, in my opinion, but whether or not they do it, who knows? I'll say they will. Heavy Storm. This is a card that came off somewhat recently in Master Duel. I guess it's been a while that it's been legal in Master Duel. And I do think that people expect it to come back to 1 in the TCG. We already have like Feather Duster here. I don't think anyone is freaking out over popping your own back row anymore, doing any wacky shenanigans like that. I think we're far past that point where this not makes any sort of concern. So I think that this is probably in the healthiest state it's going to be to come back to 1. It's not doing anything crazy in Master Duel. I think it would be totally fine to come back here. Electromite. A lot of people want to see this come back. I don't know if I'm convinced. This card is crazy. I was around when it was released. I've been around watching it dominate formats. I think Pendulum is in probably the worst spot Pendulum's ever been. There are no Pendulum decks even sniffing the like top echelon of decks. I mean, you had Melodious for a little bit, but it's completely fallen out of favor. So maybe now is the time to introduce this back to spice things up, actually. But I'm gonna predict that Konami either forgets about it again or doesn't want to bring it back again and just leaves it banned. Do I think it could come back? Maybe, but I think it's probably gonna stay banned. A card that I think could come back is Sprite Elf. It's been legal in Master Duel for quite some time. I think that Sprite is really fallen off the radar in terms of usage and playability. I think that having Elf back would be a nice bolster to that deck, to other just like rank 2 strategies or decks that need or use a level 2. I think that currently it would be in a good spot to come back. I have no problems with Elf coming back. I think it was a bit preemptively banned when it was. I mean, it was definitely warranted when it was banned. But it probably was banned maybe a bit too early given how much the power level of the different formats rose in the sets after this card's release. We're at a point now in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where I think that Sprite Elf is probably healthy enough where we can come back to it and revisit it. Now, this is a controversial one on here. This is one I added because I really want to talk about it. OSS was just put on the list. The most previous ban list banned OSS to a lot of players' applause, to a lot of players' chagrin. Um, I think that OSS is a card that really makes sense to have at one. As in, like, I guess at three versus one, it doesn't really matter all that much, but I do think that the card should come back just because I don't think it's the right hit to check those, like, Snake Eye combo decks that it was trying to check. I mean, when the card was hit, both Malice and Ryziel were already better decks than the Snake Eye combo deck that it was hitting. I think that a limit on Bonfire does a great job of checking some of the power of Snake Eye. If you really want to make sure that it is significantly less consistent but still out there, you could limit Wanted. I could see that totally being a viable option as well. Also, would be a minor check to White Forest, which is a deck that's seeing some tops at the moment. But I think that OSS allowed for a lot of creative bridging and strategies. This ban really killed the Deception engine until that White Forest stuff came out, and even still is not really seeing much success, which I think is a shame because I think the Azamina stuff is really cool. I think that the Snake Eye stuff has just completely fallen off the map. No one is playing Snake Eye anymore. Um, and I think that that is like a bit of an over adjustment. I think you could come in and ban Flamberge to get this back as well if you think that that deck is going to be too much of a problem with this back. But I think that this card was not the issue. This was kind of like a happy uniting bridge that like set up a ton of fire decks, whether they were meta, whether they were rogue. They all had a lot more starters and options to them that they just got completely cut off thanks to the axing of OSS. And so I think that Konami maybe needs to revisit this ban and see if what they did was healthy for those decks as a whole. Other cards that I think should come back. Dryden. I think Dryden should come back. I don't think this one's too controversial. I think that Dryden is very strong. Don't get me wrong. Who am I kidding? It's not. I actually don't think it's that strong. I think it's way under the power level of current decks. It's like Detonator, but 10 times worse. And it is part of a strategy that like was made almost a decade ago at this point. Like, yes, if you brought back Broad Bull and Rapier, Zodiac would be good again. But with just Dryden, I don't see the deck doing anything. Like, what are you gonna make a Zeus? Like, one Zeus is not gonna be too crazy anymore. I think we can bring back Dryden as potentially to one just to test it out, but definitely I think this could come back to even three. I see no problems with Dryden existing in the modern format. In the same vein, I feel like Anaconda can also come back to at least one. Could come back to three. I think the difference between one and three doesn't mean anything. They'll probably start it at one just to be sure. But it's been legal in Master Duel for forever and sees almost no play. Um, Especially now with the release of the Fiendsmith cards, you already have a better any two monsters makes a combo piece at the end of your combo that turns into just a better end board. Like the Fiendsmith stuff is more resilient, more consistent, has better grind game than just playing like a one-off fusion and bricks to facilitate Verte Anaconda. I think that Verte Anaconda could definitely come back with no problems. Might see some play, but I think almost no one would play it. And therefore, it's totally healthy to come back in the current metagame. Now, a card I wanted to talk about, I didn't realize it got buried down here because this should have probably been up in like the meta relevant cards I wanted to talk about potentially hitting. This is Promethean Princess. Needs no introduction. She is a valuable piece of a lot of different extra decks, both for fire decks and non-fire decks alike. I think that this is another card that, just like Barry Statue of the Torrents, has a very set shelf life to it. It just provides way too much utility for any both fire and honestly non-fire decks to just link climb up into rank four or link fours. It allows you to have interruption on your main turn one combos. It gives you again just like a free monster reborn for any of your fires to continue your comboing off if they get hand trapped or interrupted. This card just feels absolutely custom and crazy, and it's a card that I think eventually will have to get banned. There's just going to become either a fire strategy or a critical mass of good fire support that eventually causes this card to get hit. I think we saw that with Snake Eye, and this card probably was the problematic card around the Snake Eye times, but this cards were just too new to get hit. So I think that now it's kind of lived around for quite a while. Konami could certainly look at hitting it. I don't think they will, but I do think that it eventually this should be on people's radar for something that will get hit in the future. But back to cards that should come back. Masterpiece should come back to one. Came back in Master Duel, did literally nothing. True Draco is far beyond its prime, unlike Zodiac, which has a couple of key ban cards that need to stay banned for the safety of the game. Masterpiece is the only one left for True Draco, and if it came back to 3, no one would care. No one's gonna play True Draco anymore. Far too slow. Masterpiece is still an incredible boss monster. I mean, getting to quick effect pop something and being unaffected by card effects is strong. But you just have too many options in the modern metagame to get rid of this or beat over this or play around its pop. I mean, it's one pop. Detonator already represents 3 pops and a negate with cross. There's no way that Masterpiece Pass is gonna do anything relevant at this point in Yu-Gi-Oh! Similarly, I think this one might be a bit controversial for folks, and it's a bit controversial for me too, because when Pranked was the best deck, I wasn't a big fan of Pranked. I think that now, though, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is at a power level far beyond what Pranked was able to put up. I mean, they put up, a quick effect Regeki as part of their engine. Sure, it's relatively consistent. It's a 1-card combo with Meow Moo, so I don't think that this makes Pranked bad if this comes back. I think you could see some rogue play, but I think that's good. I don't think it's at a point where it would dominate the format. I don't think anyone would be clamoring for Meow Moo's ban. Again, I think that this card is strong, but is at a point where it's fine to come back and not really affect too much. I don't think it dethrones Malice or Ryzeal. They're just too hand trap resilient. They play through too much. The Ranked's deck still folds to 1 or 2 interruptions, unlike these top decks. So I think that Meow Moo could come back to minimal issues. Nightmare Griffin was a card I didn't put on here. This was already on the list, and I don't really know why it's on here. I've been following the meta pretty well. I haven't seen a single deck make Nightmare Griffin. My guess is you could make it in Malice as a Link 4 endboard piece. It's not the problem. It's not the problem at all. I can stay at 3. I mean, sure, it's got a pretty strong floodgatey effect, but no one is saying that Nightmare Griffin is the problem behind any of the top decks at the moment. This card can stay at 3, no problem. And then last, but certainly not least, everyone's favorite discussion on every Banlist video, Maxi. Where should it go? Limited, unlimited, banned? It stays banned. This goes back to what I talked about before. I kind of spoiled where I would put Maxi when I was talking about Fuelos, but I truly do think that Mulcharmies are Konami's answer to, hey, we see that one region likes Maxi, the other one doesn't like Maxi. How can we get them to agree and come to some sort of consensus where we can get the formats more in line with each other? And I think that, as we saw in Master Duel, as we've seen on recent OCG ban lists, they're more willing to hit Maxi on the OCG, put it to 2, put it to 1. Eventually, I'm hoping they ban it. And I think that in their place will stand the Mulcharmies, who will act as a sort of more situational, less all-encompassing, and with a small restriction Maxis that will take over in both regions and kind of supplant the spot that Maxi used to hold. Do I think the Mulcharmies are healthy for the game? Not necessarily. I think that there is an argument to get rid of them too. I think they're significantly more healthy than a Maxi. Being able to only use them while you're going second, I think, was a big concern with why Maxi wasn't fair. Being able to, draw every time your opponent special summons, also not fair. But I think that maybe they did a bit too much with Fuelos. I would have liked to see them distribute the special summon types across the Mulcharmies a bit more evenly. Maybe if Fuelos was deck and banishment, and then maybe Perulio was normal from hand and special from hand, I think that's fine. And then maybe Meows is extra deck and grave or something like that. Maybe that would be too good in that scenario. But I think that putting deck and extra deck is a bit crazy on one of them, so maybe that was their mistake. But other than that, I think these are a much more balanced version of Maxi, and Maxi should very much so stay banned. But yeah, that was my ban list prediction. I yapped for quite a bit there, but those are all my thoughts on the current format, where the current decks stand, how I think things should shake out and change. in order to make the format better. I think if all of this that you see right now on the screen were to happen, all of the top decks would be at a much more reasonable power level and consistency level. It wouldn't really affect the rogue decks all that much. I think the format would be a lot more diverse and healthy. But I think there's a lot I could have missed too. So if you have disagreeing thoughts on any of these, if there's cards I missed you wish I talked about, definitely let me know down in the comments. We can totally continue that discussion there. I read every comment, so I'll make sure to respond and we can continue talking about it. If you like this kind of video and want to see more, definitely go ahead and drop a like on this so I can know to make more Banlist predictions in the future. And why don't you go ahead and subscribe to the channel too so you don't miss any other kind of Yu-Gi-Oh content that I put out there. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!